Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam. I rise again in strong opposition to H.R. 897. To be clear, 897 was not created to respond to Zika. Now, I hear my colleagues' information in regard to all that is happening with the EPA and all the budget items. I suggest that we start looking at increasing the budget for EPA so they can do a better job. Insofar as herbicides and pesticides, I have a lot of information from my own experience in California, where it has created a superfund that has taken many years and will take many more to create. Up until 2 weeks ago, the so-called Reducing Regulatory Burdens Act was drafted to relax our laws protecting public health, to reduce the paperwork burdens on commercial pesticide spraying operations. If you'll notice, most of them were people in the spraying business and the ag business, and it is to their advantage. What about the public interest? This will be the fourth time in 3 years they'll vote for this against the legislation. To be clear, a great number of water bodies in the U.S. are already impaired or threatened by pesticides. Yet, for some reason, our Republican majority wants it to be easier for companies to add more of these pesticides to our waters, yet not report these additions nor monitor for any reason and immediate health impacts that may result. I am very concerned about the effect these pesticides on the health of our rivers, on our streams, and especially in the drinking water supplies of all our citizens, including pregnant women. Last week, the majority argued that even though this bill would exempt pesticide applications from the Clean Water Act, public health would not be impacted because FIFRA labeling requirements would remain in place. However, FIFRA labeling does not address the volumes of pesticide being directly or indirectly applied to our rivers, lakes, and streams on an annual basis. In many cases, we simply do not know the quantities and locations of the pesticides being added to our waters because this data is not tracked by federal or state regulators. And if we don't know what is being added to our waters, we cannot accurately be looking for potential human health or environmental impacts of these pesticides. In fact, the only way we often learn of a problem is in examples like the gentleman from Oregon cited on the floor, massive fish kills or other environmental catastrophes. It is reckless to rely on a system of catastrophes or massive die-offs to identify where problems may be lurking. Proponents of this legislation also argue that this legislation would protect the health of pregnant women and their children. How so? I think it is important to note that it could hurt both. However, this legislation does nothing demonstrable to prevent the spread of Zika in the United States. What I fear, however, is that this legislation will relax standards for pesticides application to the point where even more water bodies become impaired or threatened by pesticides. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we know significant health risks associated with exposing pregnant women and young children to pesticides. Let me name a few. Birth defects, neurodevelopmental delays and cognitive impairments, childhood brain cancer, autism and spectrum disorders, ADHD, endocrine disruption. That's just to name a few. To be clear, the bill under consideration today will make it easier, I name it again, easier, to contaminate our drinking water supplies with pesticides known or suspected to pose health risks. The majority will say that FIFRA ensures these chemicals are safe. What the majority cannot say, definitely, however, is that continued exposure to these chemicals over and over in the same watershed is also safe. Peer-reviewed science suggests that there are impacts and that evidence should be enough for us to be cautious. If my choice is cautious use of pesticides to protect public health and the elimination of paperwork requirement, I believe protection of health is more important. Furthermore, according to the Washington Post, Of the 544 reported cases of Zika in the United States, nearly all of them involve people who contracted the disease when they traveled to countries where the disease is prevalent. While a handful of the 444 cases of Zika have involved sexual transmission of the virus, no one has acquired the disease from mosquitoes in this country. I repeat, no one. Let me repeat that no one has reported acquiring the Zika virus from a mosquito in this country. We cannot and should not eliminate the role of Clean Water Act in the regulation of pesticides. Over the past 5 years, this regulatory process has been reasonable, has been workable to pest operations and ag interests alike. It needs to be retained. Madam Speaker, I oppose this bill, urge my colleagues on both sides to vote no and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.